When he was little, Pringle used to think the moon was stalking him. He always thought it followed him whenever he went for a walk or was in the car with his family at night.
Look, learning how to be a human being is so hard. When you're little, people give you so much information, your imagination has no limits, and sometimes the wires get crossed and we end up thinking some pretty interesting things. Hi, I'm Rachel Fisher.
I've been your host, Olivia Kozlowski.
And this is our top 10 list of dumbest things people have ever believed as kids. We had a lot of fuel for the fire for this one, so get ready.
Starting up this list in our number 10 spot, we have Dad's the Boss. This story comes from someone whose dad is a manager at a local business. I guess their dad was a difficult boss, considering this person remembers him coming home fairly often talking about how he had to fire someone. This person was 4 years old at the time, and I do not know how they thought this up, but it truly is so hilarious. They obviously had no idea about the workforce, so every day when their dad was coming home talking about firing someone, they really thought that he was taking all the bad employees from the business, taking them to a small concrete structure in a remote location where he would then put them in the structure and light them on fire. You guys, how is this what this kid really thought? And why were they just so okay with their dad being all kinds of messed up? I do have to give them points for imagination though. They definitely were really able to paint a picture, albeit a little gruesome. The good news is that the dad wasn't a serial killer, and this person ended up finding out what exactly that word actually meant. Eventually.
Coming in at number 9. So my mom told me this story and I think it's adorable and very, very cute. So when my mom was very, very little, I think she was around 4 or 5, her aunt came over, and at some point during the visit, she took out her dentures. And of course, at the time when you're really young, your teeth fall out, you put it under the pillow for the tooth fairy, all that jazz. She knew that humans lost their teeth at some point. But when she saw her aunt take out her dentures, my mom had the belief that when you got older or when you became an adult, you were able to take out your whole mouth, like take out your teeth. So I think that's pretty special and very, very cute.
In our number 8 spot today, we have the new dog. When I tell you I cried laughing as I read this one, guys, this is truly a thing that only a child could come up with. So, the person whose story this is had got a new pug puppy around the time that they began to hit puberty. All of us who are grown-ups know what a weird and confusing time that can be, and this person was most definitely confused. So around the same time as getting this pug, this person started to notice that they were beginning to get some blonde hair coming in on their body in places that they hadn't had hair before, which led them to one conclusion: they were becoming a pug. This sent them into a full freak out about how they were morphing into a pug. They loved their new dog, but were they really willing to turn into a dog just for him? The good news is that their education quickly caught up with them, and they learned that they were in fact very human.
Coming in at number 7. So this next story actually comes from one of my absolute best friends. Now, she doesn't know why she thought this, but at some point, again, it just stuck. She believed as a little youngin' that all cats were girls and all dogs were boys. She thinks it's because they had all boy dogs as a kid. So she was like 4 or 5 when she started believing this, but she believed this like all the way until she was like way too old to actually wrap her head around this. She was around 10 when she went to her friend's house, and she had a cat, and she was like, "Oh man, what's her name?" She's like, "No, she's a boy." And her world was shattered. She had no idea. So at some point during her youth, she thought that all cats were girls and all dogs are boys.
In our number 6 spot today, we have Giraffes. This story comes from someone who grew up in a home that had windows that weren't quite right. Because of these ill-fitting windows, this person's parents were pretty adamant that the curtains needed to stay closed in order to keep the giraffes out. Perfectly reasonable request, but not for this kid. Instead of what I just said, this kid who didn't know the word giraffes heard the word giraffe. Instead of realizing that their parents asking for them to keep the curtains closed to keep the giraffes out didn't make sense, they really and truly believed for a few years that there were just angry, intrusive giraffes roaming the streets of their neighborhood, waiting for a chance to break into the nearest window that didn't have curtains to protect it. Kids' brains truly are an absolutely wild place.
At number 5, when I was really little, really little, like I was about 4 or 5, my parents decided to put me into sports, which was just an awful idea because I'm so bad at sports. I'm like remarkably bad. But I played soccer for a number of years. I was 4 years old when I started. I remember the coach like telling me during halftime, like, hey, you're gonna play defense. I had no idea as a 4-year-old what that meant. So I like ran on the field and like panicked. I had no idea what I was gonna do. I knew I had to stand like closer to the goal, but I had no clue. And I'm like, okay, what does defense mean? Defense, fences. What do fences do? Fences stay still and stand in one spot. So I stood with my arms out, my legs like a star, trying to replicate a fence as well as I could. I stood there as the game was going on, and my dad, my like British dad's off the side. He's like, Rachel, what are you doing? And I'm like, Dad, I'm defense. So that was something definitely really stupid that I thought of as a kid. So, and don't worry, there's more to come. There's more to come.
In our number 4 spot today, we have Don't Play with Mattresses. This story comes from a kid who had a pretty classic word mix-up. They mixed up the word mattress and matches, which may seem harmless at first, but it certainly led to a lot of confusion for this kid. Obviously, every kid used to hear how dangerous matches were, and we were constantly told, do not play with matches. Because of this word mix-up, however, this kid was left wondering why we were sleeping on such flammable material. Surely there has to be a better way. And the thought of playing while on a bed? Absolute nightmare fuel to this kid for years. Luckily, they eventually learned that if they jumped on the bed, they would, in fact, not spontaneously combust.
Coming in at number 3, the chicken pox, right? If you get the chicken pox, and you know, when one kid gets one, then they all do. It's what parents fear, it's what keeps them up at night. I was no exception to this rule, and I got them pretty bad. But the worst part is the itchiness, and one of the things my dad told me to stop me from itching was that if you scratch one off, you got a scar, and I didn't know what that was, but the way he said it was terrifying, so I just didn't want it to happen. I could tell it was really bad, and I was 4 at the time, but of course I had this massive, practically another head growing chicken pox out of the side of my eye. Like it's right here. And one day, I'm like coming out of my sister's room, I remember it like yesterday, and I scratched it and the whole thing fell off. And I panicked, like just sheer fear, and I started like crying. I was crawling on the ground looking for it. And I was calling to my dad, like, Dad, get the glue! Because I thought that I could glue my chicken pox back on and I wouldn't get a scar. As soon as my dad brought the glue and realized what I was trying to do, he was like, no, that's not how that works. And I have a scar to this day. You can't see it. I don't know if you can, but like, yeah, you can kind of see it. It's like right there. There we go.
In our number 2 spot today, we have the Wind God. This story is honestly too good to be true. It starts off with this person just simply explaining that for a few weeks during their childhood, they believed with their whole heart that they were the wind god. They had a blue fly swatter, and one day while outside, every time they lifted it into the air, the wind would blow. It happened so much that this was all the evidence they needed to truly believe what they knew in their heart was their destiny. Since they were so sure of their true identity, they had no problem showing their friends their newfound powers. Well, of course, once there's an audience and it's a less windy day, these wind god powers just weren't what they once were. As it turns out, we still are unsure of the true wind god's identity.
Okay, this is our last story at number 1. I loved Pirates of the Caribbean. I loved Pirates of the Caribbean so much. I had posters all over my wall. I could recite the movie next to the soundtrack, like perfectly. I loved Pirates of the Caribbean. Still love it. I was particularly very imaginative as a kid. As a result, I'm an actor. And I convinced myself so well. And there was this really bright star outside my window, and I'd like wish on it all the time, and I used to wish on it to get a dog, and we got a dog. So one night I was just like, man, I just really want to be a pirate. Like I want this to happen. I wished so hard on this star that my poster on my wall would open up into a portal and suck me into the Pirates of the Caribbean world, and that the next day I would wake up on the poop deck of the Black Pearl. That's how strongly I felt. I was like, didn't do my homework, so I'm like, no, tomorrow I'm gonna be on the poop deck of the Black Pearl, and Jack Sparrow and I are gonna go on adventures. Can you imagine the disappointment I felt when I woke up the next morning and my mom was like, good morning, and I was like, no, it's not a good morning. I'm not fair. but I convinced myself so hard that it was actually gonna happen. But then that night I went back and I was like, you know what? No, it could happen. It totally could happen. So I went back and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna wish again. I'm gonna set the date for 2009, October 31st at midnight. This is gonna happen. And I forgot about it years later because obviously I didn't think it was ever gonna happen at all. But what's funny is that Halloween, my parents and like we all went to a wedding out in BC. So in the back of my mind, I was like, did it turn into a portal and I just missed it? Who knows?
That has been our list for today. Thank you so much for checking it out.
Like this video if you liked it, subscribe for more, and let us know in the comments if you think we should have a part 2.
Let us know in the comments if you have any crazy things that you believed as a kid, because these are just so funny to me.
Anyways, I've been your host, Rachel Fisher.
I've been your host, Olivia Kozlowski.
And we will both see you next time.
Bye!